Good morning, and welcome to another Seize the Day. Trust you guys are waking up, feeling refreshed, and ready to begin a new day. Today is Wednesday, November the 22nd, day before Thanksgiving. I'm sure today is going to be pretty packed for many of you, and trust that you find yourselves with a lot of room to spare. Um, my wife got up early this morning and made the brine for our turkey. So Mr. Turkey has been in the brine now for about an hour. So he's going to be ready. Outside, it's kind of just a pretty overcast, rainy day. Some of you are waking up in a much different climate, but all of us together, we get an opportunity to open the Word of God together. So that's a good thing. I'd like to just remind everyone, tomorrow's Thanksgiving, so we won't be having Seize the Day. I have an early morning service on Thursdays on Thanksgiving, so we'll be having a Thanksgiving service tomorrow morning. And then on Friday, I'm sure many of you will be visiting, hopefully with some family and friends. And so we'll pick it up on Monday. On Monday, my my wife is going in for that surgery that I had shared with many of you about. Pretty extensive kind of surgery. They had found a cyst on her pancreas and her bile duct, and they believe it to be precancerous, so they want to remove it. And to remove it, it's a little extensive. She's going to have to go through some reconstructive surgery where they're going to take out her bile duct and recreate one using her small intestine. So it's a pretty big operation. And so she has that on Monday. So I just appreciate your prayers. I probably will come online on Monday asking people just to keep her in prayer, because by the time we have our Seize the Day, she will begin probably surgery at that point. She has to be there at 6 a.m, and they say it takes usually about 2 hours before they get prepped, and then probably about 8 o'clock. So appreciate those prayers this weekend. We feel a lot of peace. God's shown his favor in so many ways, and so appreciate to be able to share this with this community, and knowing that so many people will be praying for her. So thank you very much. And why don't we turn now to Deuteronomy? It's a book that we've been studying now, a book that's all about a restart, starting over, right? Giving people an opportunity to once again focus their attention on the things of God. So we're in this study now in the book of Deuteronomy in chapter 10, towards the latter half of these verses. Moses has begun to give them a little bit of a summary. And now, instead of being very instructive, Moses really is trying to bring them some inspiration, and out of that inspiration, hopefully challenge them to imitate, the attributes that God has begun to display. And so there is that beautiful verses that open up Deuteronomy 10 for us. And I've asked some of you if you might even consider memorizing this verse. This is a great verse. People say, what does God expect of you? This is a great verse in Deuteronomy 10:12 to say that to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, and to observe the Lord's commands that he's giving you today for your own good. Think about that. All of this that God is doing for them is for whose good? It's not like God needs anything. This is all for us. God is placing us in the best position to thrive and to experience life in its fullness. There have been a number of times that I've just pointed out the obvious, right? That very often the decisions that we make, the choices, the paths that we follow, they far from being for our own good, they can lead to our own kind of destruction. There's a great proverb Proverbs. It's repeated a couple of times in chapter 14 and 16, but it says, there is a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it leads to destruction. Boy, isn't that true? There's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end, it leads to destruction. Because God is asking us to walk in his ways, right? To observe his commands. For what reason? It's for our own good. So God begins to put boundaries around your life, much like discipline for a child, right? You want him to thrive. You're not trying to impede him from experiencing life. You just want him to thrive. So that's what God has done here. And coming out of that, he's beginning to give them his appeal. Yesterday, we started to look at the first of those appeals. It's found in verses 14, 15, and 16, right? Where the Lord, Moses writes, "To the Lord your God belong the heavens, the highest heavens, the earth, and everything in it. Yet the Lord set his affection on your forefathers, and he loved them, and he chose you, their descendants, above all the nations as it is today." Despite the loftiness of God, he has chosen to set his affection upon Israel. Israel, think about this, whose beginning started with the unlikely birth to Abraham, and Sarah. From that early beginning, right? And you remember, for Adam and Sarah, for Abraham and Sarah, they didn't have children until Abraham was about 100, right? So the possibility of them having children was slim to none. Maybe even none to noner. It just wasn't going to happen. But God made it happen. And God made a promise to Abraham, saying, "Abraham, what seems impossible to you, it's not impossible to me." And he took him outside in Genesis chapter 15. You read about it. He took him outside and had him look up to the sky. And he said, "Abraham, believe me when I tell you, your descendants are going to be more numerous than the stars of the sky." And this is to a man who is well advanced in years and doesn't even have one son. And look what God did. God fulfilled that promise. And now this current context in which we find the book of Deuteronomy is we find all of those Israelites camped on the river's edge, looking over into a land that God had promised their forefathers. And now God is keeping that promise. So here it says the God, who owns everything, is mindful of the descendants of Abraham. And God set his affection on them, not because they were so powerful or because they were so good, right? I mean, you read in Deuteronomy 7. Remember, we looked at these passages a couple of weeks ago, where in Deuteronomy 7, we read here in verse 7 that the Lord did not set his affection on you and choose you because you were more numerous than other peoples, for you were the fewest of all peoples. But it was because the Lord loved you and kept the oath he swore to your forefathers, that he brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the land of slavery, from the Pharaoh of Egypt. When Abraham would have Isaac, and Isaac would have Jacob, and Jacob would have his 12 sons and their one daughter, Dinah. As that family began to grow, and his children had children, and their children had children, it says early on, though, that there was a famine in the land that caused them to come down to Egypt, where Joseph was now second in command to the Pharaoh. And it was because of Joseph and his influence that the family of Jacob found refuge and they found food. When they came to Egypt, they were 70 in numbers. And now look at them, a sprawling mass of people who are about to take over this promised land. But at the time They were the fewest, 70 people when they first came to Egypt. And now, look, 400 years later, God has redeemed them from this land of slavery because there arose a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. And it's amazing how things could turn, right? And it did for the nation of Israel. But not only that, in Deuteronomy chapter 9, we read that Moses tells them, he says, listen, when you experience victory in this land, it's not because of your righteousness or your integrity, but on account of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord is about to drive them out to accomplish what he swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You see, God is fulfilling a promise that he made to Abraham. And so it has nothing to do with how great they are. In fact, we would go on to read in Deuteronomy 9 of all of their failings. So it wasn't that God was doing it because they were so special. No. God chose to put his name through them. So it's always amazing to me that you read a text like this where you find this universal claim of God that he owns everything. And yet he chooses to set his affection on Israel. What a strange combination, don't you think? But you have to remember that God's intent was to use Israel as a blessing to the nations. This was always an integral part of the covenant that God made with Abraham. The promise of that God would use them to bless the nations was always an integral part of his covenant. And so God always had the broader nations of the world in view. It was just going to work through the nation of Israel. Now, I want you to think about that with me for a moment. And I'm going to put up another text on your screen here, because I think this is a really good text for you to consider. So it's found in Ephesians chapter 2 and in verses 14 through 19. So I'm going to put this up on the screen so you can follow it along. This is a great text. Now, what's the reason why I'm referring to this text? Because in this text, you find that the reason, or you find the way God is choosing to use Jesus to bless all the nations of the world. See, up to this point now, God is beginning to reveal something of his will and his purpose. And part of that, it's all around how God is working with Israel. He's going to give them this land, but he's also going to give them all of his covenants and promises. And part of those promises is that one day a Messiah would come, a Redeemer that would once again restore all the brokenness of humanity and even creation itself. He would bring it all back together. And so for century after century after century, the prophets would talk about him. You know, that's why we're closing in on the season of Christmas. And if you go back to the book of Isaiah, written 700 years before the birth of Jesus, what do you read? You read verses like in Isaiah chapter 7, where it says that his name shall be called Emmanuel, God with us, right? This child that was going to be born. Or Isaiah chapter 9, when he says, unto us a son is given, unto us a child is given, unto us a son is born, right? And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. See, those were promises of this coming Redeemer. We know in the Hebrew, the title was Messiah. In the New Testament, in the Greek, it's called Christ. So when you read Jesus Christ, you're reading Jesus Messiah, right? He's the promised one. And so in Ephesians 2, 14 through 19, Jesus is the promised Messiah of Israel. And he has now also become the Gentiles' peace. Jesus has made both the Jew and the Gentile, one, and has destroyed the barrier, this wall of hostility that existed between them. Jesus' purpose was to create in himself one new man out of the two, thus making peace. And in this one body, to reconcile both of them to God through the cross. How is God going to bring this reconciliation? Through the cross. Look what it says in verse 17. It says, Jesus came and preached peace to those who were far away and peace to those who were near. For through Jesus, we have both access to the Father by one Spirit. Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and aliens, but fellow citizens with God's people and members of God's household. So just the way God was using Israel to communicate to the nations around them his will, his purposes, his plans, in the fullness of time, God brought forth his Son, and now it is through Jesus that he preaches peace to all people and gives his life a ransom on the cross to reconcile us back to him, and so that we would all be citizens with God's people and members of God's household. See, so what God was doing with the nation of Israel, God is going to do in Jesus. And that's that final revelation that you and I have received. So the challenge then is for Israel to understand that. The challenge here in verse 16, going back now to Deuteronomy 10, right? So as we go back to Deuteronomy 10, look at verse 16. It says, circumcise your hearts, therefore, and do not be stiff-necked any longer. So in light of the fact that God owns everything, right? Israel standing before God is something that should render them, filled with wonder and awe, that the God who reigns supreme would set his affection on them, that they should be awe-inspired. They should be deeply humbled to the point where they begin to lay aside their rebellious ways and seek after him. They're going to need a new heart for that. And following God will ensure that transformation. However, rebelling against him will only result in their rejection. And God is offering them numerous opportunities so that they really will be without excuse. But there's another truth here. Look at verse 17 of Deuteronomy 10. It says, for the Lord your God is God of gods, Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. So, God of gods, Lord of lords, mighty, awesome. These are descriptives now of the one who owns everything. And so I want you to think about this. This is another truth that Moses is now beginning to give his people. And for what reason? To have them, to inspire them. To just now, he was just telling them, do you understand your standing? How God set his affection on you? The one who has, the one who owns everything has chosen you. It should be humbling and inspiring. And now he tells them this truth. Basically, what he's saying is, to put it bluntly, the God who owns the world is also the God who runs the world. He's God of gods, Lord of lords. God stands above all rule and authority, power, dominion, every title that can be given, not only in this present age, but also in the one to come. My friends, these are titles that are mentioned about Jesus. Jesus is also going to be referred to as the Lord of lords and the King of kings. And but notice what else it says. Not only that he runs everything, but he runs everything without showing partiality, right? Literally, he does not lift up his face. That's what he says. God does not show favoritism. He is full of integrity, right? No bribes, which is interesting when you think of God choosing Israel. Like, okay, so he doesn't show favoritism. Then what is he doing? Showing favor to this one nation. Well, God's showing favor to this nation. Why? Because of what we said before. We're to remember that God had plans for choosing Israel that went far beyond the nation of Israel. Israel was blessed so that they would be a blessing. But it's also true, and we've read this, right? If they abandoned this covenant that God made with them, then God would judge them. He would destroy them as he did the nations that they were about to dispossess. So God doesn't show favoritism. It's not just because you have a title that now you're in this privileged, state. No, what places us in a privileged state with God is when we demonstrate that we are keeping covenant with God. That's why that text, right? 10:12, memorize it, to fear him, right? To fear the Lord, to walk in all of his ways, to love him, to serve him with all your heart, with all your soul, and to observe his commands. See, this is what God is looking for. And the Jew and the Gentile, those who come to him in this fashion, God says, I have nothing but plans to bless you. So now we've been given this truth, right? The God who owns the world is the God who runs the world. But Moses doesn't stop there. Look at verse 18. He goes on to say, this God, he defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow. He loves the alien, the stranger among them, giving him food and clothing. Isn't it interesting that the lordship God exercises is not reserved for some special class, some royal class? This God who sits above the heavens and the earth, who owns everything, who runs everything, he has his eyes on those who are the poor, the weak, the most vulnerable. To be fatherless, to be a widow, to be a stranger in a foreign land is to be in a position of great need. And God says, I'm looking out for them. I have a way to make sure that they are fed and clothed. God's care even extends right to the stranger. And why shouldn't he? Didn't he do that for Israel? Wasn't Israel strangers in the land of Egypt? And did God not feed them? Did God not clothe them? Did God not give them manna in the desert and water to drink? And if he did it for them, why would he not do it for others? The qualifier here, right, is that people have their eyes fixed on him. This covenant that God is making with them is a God that says, listen, this is who I am. This is the power that I represent. But I've chosen you as my treasured possession. And I want you to know that I do that without partiality. So I'm not going to show you favor just because of a name, Israel. No, the favor comes when you're walking in covenant with me. And that's why the challenge then in verse 19, he says, you are to love those who are the strangers among you, for you yourselves were aliens in Egypt. We're called to follow God's example of love and grace. Remember the call to walk in God's ways? Well, this is how we do that. You want to walk in God's ways. Well, God's ways here is to be mindful of the poor and the alien. Think about Jesus in Matthew 25, when he says there's going to come an end time when the world will be judged, and it says Jesus is going to separate them like a shepherd separates sheep from goats. And to those who are welcomed into his kingdom, he says, it's because when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was sick and in prison, you visited me. And then Jesus would add, whenever you did it to the least of these, you did it unto me. So all the way back here in Deuteronomy, don't you see what God is calling us to do? To be inspired by the fact that the God who owns everything loves you. The God who runs everything is watching over you. That should be all the inspiration we need to repent from our rebelliousness and to begin to imitate him in the world in which we're living, to walk in his ways. And so that's why at the end of this text in verse 20, notice how Moses closes the deal here. He says, fear the Lord your God and serve him. Hold fast to him and take your oaths in his name. He is your praise. He is your God, the God who owns everything and runs everything. He's your God who performed for you those great and awesome wonders you saw with your own eyes. Your forefathers who went down into Egypt were 70, and now the Lord your God has made you as numerous as the stars in the sky. See, Moses understood that the inspiration Israel needed was to be found in their understanding of who God is and who they were called to be. My friends, now that you know who God is, and now that you know who you're called to be, may that be a source of constant inspiration, and may it also be a challenge to imitation, to follow his lead, to let our light shine, and may it all come from a grateful heart. Thanks so much for being a part of Seize the Day this morning. I trust that you guys have just a great day tomorrow, that you enjoy a really great Thanksgiving. I appreciate your prayers on behalf of Cindy and myself, and we'll make sure that I keep everyone informed as to what's going on. For those who maybe tuned in a little late, tomorrow and Friday, we're not having Seize the Day, so you can spend time with family and friends, enjoy this little holiday. And on Monday, I'll be sharing from Boston, where I'm taking Cindy for a pretty serious operation that she's going to have on Monday. So appreciate the prayers. Look forward to seeing you again next week. And on the weekend, if you have an opportunity to come and worship with us. God bless you, my friends. Have a great Thanksgiving.